Have you ever looked at a map of Africa and noticed two specks on the northern coast that don't seem to belong? Have you ever wondered why Spain, a European country, still controls territory on the African continent, and why those territories are surrounded by some of the world's most heavily fortified borders? And here is the question that gets to the heart of it. What happens when a centuries-old colonial dispute becomes a flashpoint for migration, human tragedy, and geopolitical brinkmanship in the 21st century? We are going to take a deep dive into the strange and contentious story of Ceuta and Melilla, two Spanish enclaves on the coast of Morocco that are also the only European Union territories on the African continent. We are going to explore how Spain ended up with these pockets of land, why Morocco claims them, and how thousands of migrants have become pawns in a geopolitical game that has turned their borders into some of the deadliest in the world. Let us start with the geography, because you cannot understand this story without understanding where these places are and why they matter. Morocco is a country that looks pretty normal on most world maps until you zoom in way closer to its north coast. There, you will notice these two weird little enclaves that aren't actually a part of Morocco, but are pockets of Spain and the European Union instead. These two pockets are known as Ceuta and Melilla. Combined, the two territories are geographically small, at only about 31 square kilometers, about the same size as the special administrative region of Macau in China. But like Macau, they are very densely populated, with Ceuta having an estimated population of about 85,000, and Melilla about 86,000 today. Together, more than 171,000 people live there, all of whom are citizens of both Spain and the EU. Despite living on a continent that is distinctly not Europe, and only sharing a border with Morocco, life in both cities, for the most part, feels very Spanish and European. The architecture, culture, food, and spoken language all seem the same as in most of southern Spain. That is, until you get out to their edges and encounter the gigantic border walls that physically isolate them from Morocco and the rest of Africa. Stretching across their entire land border with Morocco, the walls consist of parallel double fences that soar 6 meters high, historically topped with barbed wire, complete with regular guard towers and patrols of thousands of Spanish border guards. Beneath the ground, a vast network of cables connects floodlights, motion and noise sensors, and 24-hour video cameras to a central command station, while dozens of Spanish Coast Guard vessels constantly patrol the coasts. It is a large, coordinated, and complex system, explicitly designed to keep people out of the other side of Africa. The walls effectively make both Ceuta and Melilla isolated islands of the EU and Spain in Africa. If you look more closely at their borders in Google Maps, you will notice that they both appear as dashed lines, symbolizing that they are disputed. Morocco claims both of them in their entirety, and has disputed their ownership with Spain for decades. On the surface, you might be more inclined to side with Morocco's stance. Morocco asserts that these two cities are the final living remnants of European colonialism in Africa today, and therefore should be surrendered to them. Spain asserts that they are both core, integral territories of Spain, just as much as anywhere else on the Spanish and European mainland. Caught in the crossfire of this geopolitical dispute over the past several years have been thousands of migrants from all around the world, treated by both sides as effectively sacrificial, disposable pawns in their own great game. This has led to hundreds of deaths at these heavily fortified borders over just the past few years, making them not only the deadliest borders anywhere in the EU, but among the most blood-soaked borders anywhere on Earth during the entire 21st century. And yet, these disputed and deadly borders at the frontiers of Europe and Africa have attracted very little international attention. To understand what is going on today, you need to understand the history that got us to this strange point. Ceuta, in particular, is one of the two key strategic locations, along with Gibraltar, to control access through the nearby Strait of Gibraltar, the only natural passageway between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Ceuta is a narrow, winding peninsula that juts out from the African mainland, making it a highly defensible position against the rest of Africa. In the 8th century AD, Ceuta served as the launch pad for the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, which would last for the next 800 years. During the Reconquista, when the Christian kingdoms of Iberia were pushing the Muslims out, the Portuguese advanced across the Strait of Gibraltar to seize and conquer Ceuta in 1415, marking the very start of modern European expansion into Africa, which would reach its apex centuries later, when nearly the entire continent would be conquered. After conquering Granada in 1492, the last Muslim stronghold in Iberia, Spain sailed across the Mediterranean 5 years later and seized Melilla, establishing a defensive outpost to secure the Strait of Gibraltar and block North African Muslim powers. A century later, during the Iberian Union, 1580 to 1640, Ceuta remained nominally Portuguese, but fell under Spanish control. By the time the Union collapsed, Ceuta's population had become predominantly Spanish, the only Portuguese territory to side with Spain. Portugal formally ceded it in the 1668 Treaty of Lisbon. For centuries, Spain treated both cities as military forts and penal colonies, defensive posts against Barbary piracy, and dumping grounds for undesirables. North African Arabs and Berbers launched repeated sieges to reclaim them, including the longest continuous siege in history. Ceuta was surrounded for 33 straight years, 1694 to 1727. None succeeded. Much later, in 1859, further disagreements over the borders between Ceuta and Melilla and the Kingdom of Morocco led to a devastating war that resulted in thousands of deaths and ended in a decisive Spanish military victory, forcing Morocco to sign the Treaty of Wad Ras in 1860. That treaty, for the first time, extended Morocco's formal recognition of Spanish sovereignty over both Ceuta and Melilla, and set their current borders as we know them today. As the European scramble for Africa continued across the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Morocco eventually yielded to unbearable colonial pressures in 1912, when it agreed under duress to become divided between a new French protectorate and a new, smaller Spanish protectorate. These two protectorates, placed over Morocco and Spain's previously acquired territories in Ceuta and Melilla, never came together. They never became a part of Spain's colonial protectorate in Morocco, and were always considered by the Spanish to be separate, integral territories of Spain itself. Decades later, in 1956, when the protectorate was dissolved and Morocco regained its independence from both France and Spain, Spain continued holding on to its control over both Ceuta and Melilla, based on the argument that they had never been a part of the Moroccan protectorate, and that they had been directly controlled by Spain for centuries, well before the 19th century era of European colonialism in Africa had even begun. Spain argued, and continues to argue, that Ceuta and Melilla are not the results of European colonialism in Africa, but are instead historically integral territories of Spain that have been part of the country for about the same length of time as cities like Granada have been on the Spanish mainland, for more than half a millennium. Morocco rejects Spanish sovereignty over Ceuta and Melilla, calling them colonial remnants, despite past treaties like the 1860 Treaty of Wad Ras. Since independence in 1956, Morocco has demanded Spain cede both cities. Spain refuses. But Spain's position is hypocritical. Across the strait, it demands the UK return Gibraltar, arguing British control is illegitimate colonialism. Yet for Ceuta and Melilla, Spain argues the opposite. The territories are integral parts of Spain, home to Spanish citizens who overwhelmingly reject joining Morocco. It's the exact mirror image. Still, the dispute remains contained. Unlike French Algeria or Israel, These cities don't isolate Spain from the Arab world. Only Morocco objects. Transferring them would require a referendum, which would fail. Polls show Ceuta and Melillas' 170,000 residents overwhelmingly prefer Spanish and EU membership. Morocco knows an invasion would spark international crisis and likely fail. So the status quo holds. Neither Ceuta nor Melilla falls under NATO's formal protection, since they're outside Europe. But Spain can defend them alone. Ceuta sits just 17 kilometers from the mainland, near Spain's Rota naval base and Morón air base. Spain's military budget is more than double Morocco's, and it would have EU backing. Morocco knows an invasion is hopeless, so it won't try. Instead, Morocco uses hybrid warfare. Initially, Spain allowed Moroccans to cross freely for work. The dispute faded until the 1990s, when Spain joined the EU and Schengen. Then, Algeria's civil war sent refugees flooding toward Melilla, just 70 kilometers from Algeria, the nearest EU territory. Brussels pressed Spain to stop the flow. In 1996, Spain began building a 3-meter double fence along Melilla's border. By 1998, the first phase was complete. But due to rough terrain, the fence didn't follow the exact border. It followed an approximation. Some Spanish residents suddenly found their homes on the Moroccan side. As migration from Africa and the Middle East surged, Spain fortified Ceuta and Melilla. By 2005, the fence doubled to 6 meters and fully encircled both cities. In 2014, anti-climb mesh and barbed wire were added. By 2020, sections reached 9 meters. But with each upgrade, violence and tragedy at the borders escalated. Tensions with Morocco exploded in 2002. Armed Moroccan soldiers occupied a tiny, uninhabited Spanish island near Ceuta and raised their flag. A Spanish patrol boat spotted it. When guardsmen landed, Moroccans forced them back at gunpoint. Days later, Morocco built a base there. Spain warned it wouldn't accept the fait accompli. A week later, it launched Operation Romeo Sierra. Eurocopter Cougars carrying special forces landed on the island, with F-18s and Mirage F-1s overhead providing air cover. The orders: 0 casualties, but lethal force authorized if fired upon. The Moroccan soldiers surrendered without a fight. Operation Romeo Sierra ended bloodlessly. Prisoners were returned, and Spain reclaimed the island. But the message was clear. Military clashes over these territories were still possible in the 21st century. Morocco hasn't tried again, but it hasn't dropped its claim either. As migration surged, the borders grew deadlier. Morocco adopted a hybrid strategy, letting migrants flow toward the enclaves to pressure Spain, while Brussels demanded Spain seal the frontiers. Migrants were caught in the middle. Between August and October 2005, Amnesty International reported 13 deaths at the Ceuta and Melilla borders. Groups of desperate migrants, dozens to hundreds at a time, would rush the fences from Morocco. They faced live ammunition from Moroccan forces on one side, rubber bullets and tear gas from Spanish forces on the other. In 2006, 3 migrants died in a single day attempting to cross into Melilla. 1 from gunshot wounds, 2 from falling off the wall. Spain insisted its guards never fired live rounds, but Amnesty International presented credible testimony from a 2005 migrant who claimed he was shot and severely injured by a Spanish border guard. In 2007, Spain's King Juan Carlos I visited both enclaves, triggering a diplomatic crisis. Morocco recalled its ambassador, and its prime minister compared Spanish control of Ceuta and Melilla to Israeli occupations. The crisis faded within months, but the comparison lingered. Then came 2014. In February, around 200 sub-Saharan migrants tried to swim around Ceuta's wall at night. Spanish guards fired rubber bullets and tear gas at the swimmers, impairing their ability to stay afloat. 15 drowned, the deadliest crossing attempt yet. Spain initially denied it, but surveillance footage confirmed the tragedy. Ceuta and Melilla, Europe's doorstep, Africa's wound. The Spanish investigation cleared the border guards. No one was charged. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International condemned the outcome. Spain then banned rubber bullets in both enclaves, and the EU paid Morocco €346 million over 6 years to help stop migrants before they reached the fences. For a while, the deaths decreased. The dispute faded. Then COVID hit. In 2020, Spain closed the borders to Moroccan citizens, a privilege that, 6 years later, still hasn't been restored. The EU paid Morocco another €500 million to keep cooperating on migration. But in 2021, the biggest crisis in over a century erupted. Spain admitted Brahim Ghali, leader of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, for medical treatment. To Morocco, this was a provocation. The Satter claims Western Sahara, which Morocco invaded and annexed after Spain withdrew in the 1970s. The indigenous Sahrawi people have fought a decades-long insurgency against Moroccan rule, with tens of thousands dead. Hosting their leader in Madrid was a match thrown into gasoline. By the 1990s, Morocco controlled about 70% of Western Sahara, all major cities, pushing Sahrawi forces into the remaining desert and neighboring countries. Morocco built a fortified wall of ditches and minefields across the frontier. Sahrawi attacks along it have continued for decades. Morocco offers autonomy. The Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic demands full independence. So when Spain admitted Sahrawi leader Brahim Ghali for medical treatment in April 2021, Morocco saw red, an endorsement of the enemy. Morocco retaliated by weaponizing migration. Border guards stood down. In a single day, nearly 8,000 people crossed into Ceuta, roughly 10% of the city's population. Spain was overwhelmed. They deported most back immediately, including an estimated 1,500 children, a move the Spanish Supreme Court later ruled illegal. The message from Morocco was clear. We own this border, and we can break it whenever we want. Morocco's tactic worked. In March 2022, Spain reversed decades of policy and endorsed Morocco's autonomy plan for Western Sahara, effectively recognizing Moroccan sovereignty. In return, Morocco promised to seal the border again. But the damage was done. Migrants trapped in Morocco, now facing crackdowns, made a desperate move. June 24, 2022. Around 1,700 people, mostly from Sudan and South Sudan, stormed the Melilla border wall. They targeted a section abandoned during COVID. Hundreds scaled the first fence and packed into a holding yard between the walls, trying to cut through a gate to Spain with a power saw. Moroccan police surrounded them and opened fire. Rubber bullets, tear gas. What happened next would become the deadliest day in the enclave's history. According to later independent investigations by Lighthouse Reports, at least 20 tear gas canisters were fired into the crowded central courtyard, where hundreds of the migrants had gathered. After the gate into Spain was finally forced open, a stampede to escape from the tear gas and the rubber bullets began through it, which caused a brutal crowd crush as dozens of people were pushed to the ground and trampled. Footage released later showed survivors being ruthlessly beaten by the Moroccan police with batons, as they lay on the ground without even resisting. The official Spanish report into the incident would later conclude that a minimum of 37 migrants died due to the crowd crush at the border. A separate Amnesty International report concluded that a further 77 of the migrants still remain missing and unaccounted for nearly 4 years after the incident. As of this video's production, all 77 of them continue to remain missing, implying that they likely died as a result of the crowd crush as well, and were quietly buried in mass graves somewhere on the Moroccan side of the border, unknown. Because of this, it's likely that the true number of people who died that day, attempting to cross the border into Melilla, was more like 114, by far the highest number ever recorded during a single incident, and more than previous entire decades' worth of deaths at the border all combined. All of which gave the incident its now infamous nickname, the Malia Massacre. Out of the 1,700 people who rushed the border wall that day, in addition to the likely 114 who were killed, 603 others managed to make it over to the other side in Spain, 470 of whom were immediately deported back into Morocco and shipped off on Moroccan buses all across the country, and only 133 of whom were able to stay and safely claim asylum in Europe. The Spanish government has officially claimed that none of the 114 people who died in the crush did so on Spanish territory, which is a blatant untruth. The Spanish land registry record shows that more than 13,000 square meters of land in the holding yard, including the section of the wall where the door was opened that triggered the crush, belonged to the Spanish state. Nonetheless, by asserting that none of the deaths took place on Spanish territory, Spain and the EU had both effectively taken the stance that the tragedy that took place that day wasn't actually their problem. Morocco's brutality that day had a purpose: to prove to Spain that recognizing Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara was the right call. By cracking down hard, Morocco showed it could be the EU's border enforcer, when it chooses to be. But that's the catch. Morocco plays a double game. When paid or pleased, it blocks migrants. When provoked, it opens the floodgates. Spain refuses to cede the enclaves. Morocco refuses to stop claiming them. Caught in between are thousands of human beings, treated as disposable pawns in a geopolitical game. June 24, 2022, was the deadliest day in the enclave's history. It won't be the last. If this helped you understand, like, subscribe, and share. Because borders aren't just lines on a map. They're where history, politics, and human desperation collide, often with deadly consequences. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.